Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amanda Archibong-Doukoure. I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager for Africa at the Global Center on Adaptation. And we have here today Ijjasz-Vásquez and Jamal Saghir, Senior Advisors to the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation, and Julia Eshon, as well as Daniel Flores, Research Assistants at the GCA. We will be discussing today two flagship reports launched recently at the Africa Climate Summit. These are part of the flagship State and Trends in Adaptation reports, and we'll be looking into the questions that they bring up. What are these reports about? Please tell us.
Amanda, thank you so much for this opportunity to present briefly these two important reports. The first report focuses on finance to try to understand the trends and the gaps of climate adaptation funding flows into Africa, and also to analyze where is that money coming from, where is it going to, what are the recipient countries, and the type of instruments. Are they grants? Are they loans? Are they private investments? And also to review some of the methodological challenges of those numbers. What are the approaches to count what is adaptation funding to the continent? The second report is planning, to understand what is the progress of adaptation planning and strategies in Africa, and to highlight opportunities and ways to improve that process so that countries and partners can be better prepared to implement potential investments and more flow for adaptation in the region.
Thank you very much for that. According to the report, how much should adaptation finance in Africa increase? Could you please respond, Jamal?
Adaptation finance flows in Africa only reached $11 billion annually in 2019-2020. The increase in 21-22 is likely to be modest, potentially in double-digit percentage, but it will not approach doubling before 2025 if current trend of flows continue. African NDC, what we call the Nationally Determined Contribution, I calculate that the continent needs around $53 billion per year for adaptation, around 2.5% of African GDP. However, this number is likely to be an underestimate by as much as 100%. Africa may need much more, by $100 billion per year for adaptation. This means that by 2035, Africa may need as much as $845 billion to $1.7 trillion for adaptation, given the expected underestimation we have seen so far. At the current growth rate of adaptation finance, Africa will receive only about $180 billion by 2035, less than 1/10 of what the region needs. Even if the world achieved the doubling of adaptation finance by 2025, or around $40 billion, and all comes to Africa, it does not even cover $53 billion that we need today. Our message in the report is very clear. Adaptation flows to Africa must increase 5 to 10-fold from $11 billion to around $53 to $106 billion per year.
Thank you very much, Jamal, for those statistics. And we know that adaptation is not only about costs. What are the economic benefits of this investment? Please, Eddie, tell us.
Thank you, Amanda. That's a second important message of the report. Those flows of finance into adaptation should not be simply just seen as cost. Actually, in the flagship report of the Global Center on Adaptation, the State and Trends in Adaptation report, we have analyzed that in Africa, for every dollar that is invested in adaptation, you get returns, economic benefits between $2 and $15. So adaptation makes economic sense. Adaptation is a good business. So if Africa is not able to mobilize the $1.7 trillion that it needs between now and 2035, then Africa is leaving on the table. Africa is not reaping the benefits of adaptation by as much as $6 trillion by 2035. The lack of adaptation in Africa is not only an issue of cost, it is an issue of tremendous economic benefits. $6 trillion by 2035.
Wow, those are alarming figures. And how is external adaptation funding coming to Africa? What type of financial instrument is most commonly used? Please let us know, Jamal.
Amanda, let's start by giving you a simple figure. Last year, public debt in Africa reached $1.8 trillion. While this is a fraction of the overall outstanding debt of developing country, Africa debt has increased by 183% since 2010, roughly 4 times higher than its growth of the economic development in dollar terms. When we look at adaptation, the majority of adaptation finance is channeled through loans, making the debt situation of country more onerous and more serious. In Africa, more than half, around 54% of adaptation finance in 2019-2020 were channeled through debt. So can you imagine when we add the adaptation debt to the overall debt, what kind of economic impact it has on the countries of Africa? In energy and transport, the grant component of adaptation finance is less than 15%. And as you know, these are 2 important sectors for trade, for development. Even for the agriculture sector, the grant component is about half, 53%. So Africa is paying back the majority of adaptation financing flow. It's all about debt and it's about loan. This has to be reversed.
Thank you very much, Jamal. Indeed, this has to be reversed. In terms of the sources of adaptation funding, who is contributing the most and who can further increase their investments into adaptation? Please let us know, Eddie.
Thank you, Amanda. The report analyzes and traces back who are the institutions, the organizations that are providing that adaptation finance. And what we find is that a little over half, 53%, is provided by multilateral financial organizations like the World Bank, African Development Bank, and many others. Now, what was surprising and very positive is that African governments themselves are actually financing 26% of adaptation. So it's not that African governments are sitting there waiting for external funds to come in. They themselves are putting more than a quarter of the adaptation flows. Now, the bilaterals, donor organizations from Europe, US, Japan, and many other countries are putting about 16% of the flows. And then the global multilateral climate funds like the Green Climate Fund, GF, and Adaptation Fund, and many others are putting about 3%. Where we see that there is an opportunity to increase funding is from the commercial financial institutions and private sector organizations, who at the moment are only putting about 3%. Given the tremendous economic benefits of adaptation, we believe there is a large, fantastic opportunity for the private sector to come into this sector to support adaptation financing to increase. But the key message is that everybody, every organization must increase adaptation finance because Africa needs 5 to 10-fold more adaptation finance in years to come.
Thank you so much for that insight. And it's good to know that African countries are also contributing to adaptation finance. Now, in terms of the distribution of the financing in Africa, are funds allocated to the countries that need them the most? Please, can you let us know, Jamal?
Thank you. Let me add to what my colleague Eddie just said, which is very important. Adaptation finance is highly concentrated in Africa. 10 countries receive more than half of the continent adaptation finance, and the bottom 10 countries receive less than 1%. Africa 10 most climate vulnerable countries receive only 18% of adaptation finance. This is an important finding in our report. Only 7 countries in Africa today have all the key strategic and planning elements for adaptation action in place. So if you are not receiving the fund, it's because strategically it's weak, planning is weak, priority programs are weak or not sequenced in a proper way, and institution critical tasks to deliver those funds are also weak. The country climate adaptation compact that we have developed together with the donor community, including the African Development Bank, is an important tool to support the translation of direction from the NDC to implementable, bankable project to make it work, especially for those vulnerable countries and those that are not receiving enough funds that they need for their development.
Thank you so much for that insight. And in terms of the capacity to use the funding effectively, what does the research say about the enabling environment for African countries to be able to utilize these funds effectively?
Thank you, Amanda. To add to Jamal's point, Africa has made good progress in developing national strategies for adaptation, embedded in their national determined contributions and national adaptation plans, but the depth of these strategic documents and the quality of the enabling environment to support the adaptation investments vary across the continent. According to our analysis, about half of African nations have a good or better environment for adaptation investments. Nevertheless, only 7 countries, and Jamal spoke to this point, in Africa have the key strategic and planning elements for adaptation costs and adaptation cost estimates and specific adaptation goals stated. This means these countries are ready to absorb financing, implement adaptation programs at scale, with notably low-income countries being more likely to have a favorable environment for adaptation investments. However, there is much to be done, as there's still a general lack of well-defined adaptation plans. For instance, a total of 31 African countries have not provided evidence in their adaptation documents on the costs of carrying their adaptation measures. Another example is that many countries still need to establish and enhance their monitoring systems for adaptation actions, as only one indicated that has a system in place, while all the others are or still in planning stage or indicated that they have the will to develop one. M&E system for adaptation would allow countries to track the progress of adaptation goals and measures. Therefore, there's many countries in Africa that still need to work on enhancing their planning enabling environment to address these gaps and support adaptation investments. It is crucial to enhance the institutional arrangements for adaptation action and planning to allow African countries to use and access this finance efficiently, inclusively, and impactfully.
Well, thank you so much for explaining on the enabling environment, that there's still so much to do. Now I'll turn to Julia, please. Can you let us know what are the priority sectors that have been identified from the report for adaptation? Are there any sectors that are missing? Could you please let us know, Julia? Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. So the 3 most identified priority sectors for adaptation were agriculture and livestock, which was mentioned by 48 countries, water, which was mentioned by 44 countries, and health, which was mentioned by 36 countries. There were, however, some important economic sectors vulnerable to climate change that require more attention and prioritization. So, for example, 1/3 of coastal countries did not prioritize any adaptation actions for their blue economies. 15 countries mentioned tourism as a priority sector for adaptation. Youth, jobs, and locally led adaptation are also important key themes that require more attention. Further, less than 40% of African countries made an important connection with disaster risk reduction in their adaptation strategies. So adaptation plans need to be continuously improved by considering all key vulnerable economic sectors, such as tourism and the blue economy. And it's critical for the African region to enhance coordination between their strategic adaptation documents and their national disaster risk reduction strategies. So this can be done by merging initiatives or creating interagency coordination mechanisms to ensure the strongest possible leverage between these 2 areas of work.
Thank you very much, Julia, for that insight. And with that, thank you to everyone for this discussion. It has been very insightful. And the reports are available and you can download them on the website as shown on the screen. And we encourage our viewers to learn more about opportunities that adaptation presents for finance and planning in adaptation in Africa. Thank you very much once again.